Hello, Neogenians. Welcome to Dawn of the New Earth. Today we're talking about the God that's higher than God and the devil. See, I recently just did a video about Abraxas, but now we're going to go into an even deeper dive into this very important and mysterious God. We're going to be exploring what Carl Jung had to say about him in more detail, as well as exploring the link between, or the commonality between Abraxas and another Gnostic god called Barbelo that I never really see anyone talking about, which is very interesting to me. So we're going to be exploring all that and more. This is going to be a very good one. But hey, as always, remember, my friends, this is not a channel. We are in a war of the mind. We're here to make higher consciousness go viral. We're here to revolutionize thought. Literally, we're making what the church tried to bury for 2,000 years reach millions of people every month. And that's incredible. And it's because of your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing that we can reach those people. So make sure you do all that so we can spread this like fire. If you want to help out in other ways, you can become a member. You'll get access to a lot of great things like free downloads on inner transformation, Kabbalah, esoterica, alchemy. If you're at the Pathfinder tier or higher, you can get access to all of our members-only videos. There's a ton of them, and they're pretty good if I do say so myself. Tonight, we're actually having a live recording of one of the members-only videos, and it's called, What If Cain Was Right? The First Murder Was a Lie, as we explore the secret Gnostic interpretation of Cain and Abel. And it's going to blow your mind. It's not like anything that you have heard before. Let's see, and if you want a free way to support, you can follow me over on Spotify. I have a Spotify channel, and we're reaching even more people over there. When you guys go over there and follow, we reach a new audience. So if you have a Spotify account, go follow. Oh yeah, and you can always check out my books, of course, as well. Links to all those things, my books, Spotify channel, membership, etc. They are in the description of this video. And let's get right into it. So we're talking about Abraxas, which is a very mysterious god, and he appears in Gnostic texts. And he's not only does he appear in Gnostic texts, but he appears in a book called the Greek Magical Papyri, which is a book of spells. And he was used as a name of power in, throughout history. Some even speculate that Abraxas could be where we get abracadabra from. That's not known for sure, but it's a possibility. But Carl Jung, who is one of the most influential psychologists ever, he coined introvert and extrovert. He's the one who brought to light the process of shadow integration, exploring your shadow work, things like that. Incredibly brilliant individual. Now, the interesting about Carl Jung is that he wrote a book, I believe in 1917. Let me double check that. 1916. He wrote it in 1916 called The Seven Sermons to the Dead. And most of it is about Abraxas. And so let's just start there so we can get an overview of what's even being discussed here. So when Jung released this book, he didn't publish it to the masses. He kept it a secret, and he only gave it to close friends and certain students of his. And not only that, but he didn't publish it under his name. He did so in terms of, well, I mean, I don't even know if you want to say he published it, because he created a lot of copies to hand out to his, his close friends. This wasn't something that you could go just buy. It was kept on the down low. Now, he didn't even credit himself as the author. He wrote as Basilides. Okay, so he put the author's name as Basilides. But it's really cool because at the very end of his book, there's a secret code, and if you decode it, it reveals that it was written by Carl Jung. But so what's up with this book? This is my favorite book written by Carl Jung. It's a very mysterious text. It's a very interesting text, and it's very short. I don't know, maybe it's like 20 pages long or something like that. You could read it in a couple hours, if that, maybe like an hour you could read it in. It's really good, but there's so much packed into this. And so why did he call himself Basilides? Well, this is a reference to a Gnostic leader called Basilides. And what grew from his teachings were the Basilidian Gnostics, the followers of the teachings of Basilides. And Basilides taught about a entity called Abraxas. And this entity that Basilides called Abraxas was described as a cosmic ruler of the heavens and the material world. So what Carl Jung did was he took this symbol of Abraxas and used it to symbolically unveil a force that is above both God and the devil, above both light and darkness, above both good and evil. So this will start to make more sense, but let's just actually start to look at this and see what it says, and then we'll make more comparisons and see how this all lines up. So the sermon and the way that, so it says, this is the 7 sermons to the dead written by Basilides in Alexandria, the city where the east touches the west. So east and west are generally opposites, right? The west is the sunset, the east is the sunrise. East is typically associated with light because it's sunrise. West is usually typically associated with darkness because it's sunset, so light and dark. So when he says that it was written by Basilides in Alexandria, the city where the east touches the west, he's again bringing this idea of light and darkness touching, light and darkness, opposites, polarized forces being unified. Now, of course, this wasn't written by Basilides in Alexandria. It was written by Carl Jung, but to get a very important message across. So we're going to explore what Jung said about Abraxas. Now, Abraxas, again, remember, is an actual being that the Gnostics discussed. They saw him in different ways, though. Not all Gnostics agreed what Abraxas was. A lot of different Gnostic sects had different beliefs about Abraxas. And also, to be clear, his name is actually Abraxas, not Abraxas, not Abraxas, but Abraxas. So Abraxas is his actual name, but through, linguistic or written games of telephone, letters got swapped around and it became Abraxas. But regardless, Abraxas is very interesting, and there's a lot of things encoded in the name Abraxas itself. If you take the Greek numerology and add up the letters that make up Abraxas, it adds to 365, one for every day of the year, and the Basilides describe 365 heavens. So it shows his rulership over the 365 heavens and the 365 days of the year, meaning a transcendent domain and a domain of time, a temporal domain, a domain outside of time, the heavens, and a domain within time with regard to the 365 days of the year. Did I say days? I hope I didn't say days of the week. If I didn't, obviously it's days of the year. But speaking of days of the week, there are 7 letters in Abraxas or Abraxas, one for each day of the week. And of course, this is also associated with the 7 classical planets. In, ancient systems, before we invented telescopes, they saw 7 planets or 7 wandering stars. So they considered the moon and the sun to be one of these planets or wandering stars. So you have, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, the sun, Venus, Mercury, and the moon. Those were the 7 classical planets. So you see, even just in the name Abraxas, there's all this cool stuff tied into there. 365 heavens, 365, space and time, transcendent to space and time, days of the week, planetary powers that were seen to shape personality. So there's a lot there. There's a lot even just encoded into the name Abraxas. But let's actually start reading this, or else I'll just go on and on forever. And I want to make sure that we get to all the things I want to discuss today. So it starts off by saying the dead came back from Jerusalem where they found not what they sought. So this is about the dead coming back from Jerusalem being like, hey, teach us things. So this represents basically the dead are the spiritually dead, those that haven't found truth. And they came back from Jerusalem basically like, oh, we could not find truth in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is usually considered the holy city. But they didn't find any truth in Jerusalem. And in fact, in some Gnostic texts, like the first apocalypse of James, Jesus says to his brother James, basically, get the hell out of Jerusalem because it's crawling with archons, dark forces of ignorance and enslavement. So later on in the text, it's revealed that these dead that come from Jerusalem are actually Christians. So essentially, they're spiritually dead because they couldn't nourish themselves on Christianity. So they're coming to Basilides, aka Jung, as a Gnostic teacher to understand truth. Now here's how Jung / Basilides describes reality. He says, hearken, I begin with nothingness. Nothingness is the same as fullness. In infinity, full is no better than empty. Nothing is both empty and full. Now, right away, if you're familiar with the Neogenian system, I am a Neogenian, by the way. That's what my books are about. It's a 5-part series on the Neogenian system. You'll see how this lines up with how we understand reality mathematically. So in the Neogenian system, 1, 0, and infinity all form one concept, and you could even look at them as the Neogenian trinity. And so if we think about this mathematically, we can see 0 as being equal to every possible mathematical value, which means for every positive value, it's paired with a negative value. So you'll have +1, -1, +2, -2, +3, -3, etc. And so what is the mathematical result of this infinite fullness of numbers? It's 0. So that's how you can have 0 being equivalent to a fullness, a kind of infinity. And then where does 1 come from? Well, how many zeros are there? There's 1 0. So you have 1 0 that contains infinite energy, essentially, is what we're saying. So you can see how mathematically this starts to make a lot more sense if we apply, sometimes things that seem very abstract, and it depends how you think. If you're a left-brain person, the mathematical concepts might click way more for you, like that, what do you mean nothing is everything, and blah, blah, blah. But when you look at it mathematically, it makes perfect sense. Whereas if you're maybe perhaps a more intuitive person, the mathematics doesn't help, but rather the symbolic nothingness and everything will make more sense to you. But we need both, really. We need both. We need the intuition and we need the reason to come together. And so you can see that this is very, very close, where he says nothingness is the same as fullness, and infinity, full is no better than empty. Nothingness is both empty and full. And so they have the concept of basically 0 and infinity. But in Gnosticism, what essentially do they call this? They call this the one. So we see this reflected in Gnosticism, the one, the 0, the infinity. Even though they weren't explicit about 0 and infinity, they called it the one. But you can see how Carl Jung explains it. It's this containment of 0 and infinity at the same time as well. Now, in Kabbalah, we have a very similar situation here, where you have the foundation of reality is Ein, which means nothing, Ein Sof, which means the infinite, and Ein Sof Or, which means the infinite light. So you have basically the infinite nothing in Kabbalah. And so you can see where all this stuff starts to connect. Gnosticism, Kabbalah, mathematics, because they're all talking about the same thing. So that's what Carl Jung is talking about here. Is the basis of all reality is nothing and everything. Infinite and nothingness. He says, as well might ye say anything else of nothingness, as for instance, white is it or black, or again, is it not or it is? A thing that is infinite and eternal hath no qualities, since it hath all qualities. So what he means by that is he's saying that if you say this eternal fundamental aspect of existence, this eternal fundamental aspect of existence, if you say it is black, you're wrong, because to say that it is black means it's not white, it's not red, it's not blue. It excludes things from it, but it contains everything. So you can't just say, oh, it's black, or oh, it's red, or oh, it's white. You actually can't say anything about it, because anytime you give it some sort of quality, you're excluding something from it. So if I were to say this infinite thing is 25, well, no, it's not 25, because that would mean it's not 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or negative 1,252. So nothing and everything, nothing contains everything. Therefore, since it contains everything, you can't give it a quality, because if you give it a quality, it's going to exclude other qualities, and therefore it's not infinite anymore. And this is actually something that Christians don't understand, is that in general, Christians believe that God is infinite. But they also believe that the world is not within God, that the world is created by God, and in some sense is separate from God. But if God is everything, then that includes the world and us, meaning we are a part of God. Fundamentally, we are pieces of God. But Christianity doesn't understand if you're engaging in Christianity, it's probably likely that logic is not your greatest priority, unless you've been brainwashed into it, and then you're trying to use logical arguments to try and justify it. But it's completely unjustifiable, the mainstream interpretation of Christianity, in my opinion. I am an ex-Christian, by the way, for those who don't know. I was Christian for many, many, many years. So anyway, you can see this really cool idea, and we're getting to Abraxas, right? Because you can see already in this concept, because Abraxas is the unity of everything, the unity of opposites. And you can already see this in something like nothing and everything. Zero and infinity. They seem like opposites, but they're actually not. They're different ways of seeing the same thing, different ways of looking at the same thing. So he continues by saying the nothingness or fullness we name the Pleroma. So he calls it Pleroma. What is Pleroma? Pleroma is simply the Greek word for fullness, the fullness. And in Gnosticism, you have the one, and as the one begins generating and unfolding emanations of itself, the realm of light that it generates is called the Pleroma. So in Gnosticism, the Pleroma is simply the one expressing itself as ordered forms of light. And you see the Kabbalistic crossover as well. Remember, Ein, Ein Sof, and Ein Sof Or, nothing, the infinite light. So you see these concepts are related as well. Light is related to all this. So the nothingness or fullness, we named the Pleroma. So the Pleroma is this transcendent realm of nothing and infinity. Therein both thinking and being cease, since the eternal and infinite possesses no qualities. It is no being, in it no being is, for he then would be distinct from the Pleroma and would possess qualities which would distinguish him as something distinct from the Pleroma. So I'm not going to dwell too much on this because I could argue certain things. It depends how he's using the word being, because the one isn't a being, but it is being itself. So I wouldn't agree 100% with this, but here's one thing about Jung, and one thing that really bothers me about Jung. I don't mind it in this because he's talking very in mythological terms. So he can be a bit more loose. But when Jung tries to put his ideas into a more logical pattern, he does so in a very frustrating way that's not really conducive to left brain thinking. He's much more conducive to right brain thinking and presenting myths and stories and allegories. And so when he tries to put things in a strict logical way, it doesn't always make 100% sense. That's why I actually don't really like Carl Jung's writing. I love his ideas. His ideas are fantastic, but this is why this is my favorite book by Carl Jung, is because it's written as a story. I think Jung is a fantastic storyteller, but when it comes to clearly laying out ideas, it's kind of all over the place a lot of the times, and it can be frustrating. But that's just me. Other people perhaps can learn, who are more right brain thinkers, can learn better from Jung. I should actually explore that more, because that would exercise right brain thinking, which is a good thing to do. We want to exercise right brain and left brain thinking. When I say right brain and left brain, I'm being very generalized here, in terms of the functions that we typically associate with those things. So in the Pleroma, there is nothing and everything. It is quite fruitless to think about the Pleroma, for this would mean self-dissolution. Okay, so we kind of know what the Pleroma is. It's this infinite nothingness that is perfect and basically contains all energy. Now he says Creatura is not in the Pleroma, but in itself. So Creatura just means create, something that is created. Okay. Now the Pleroma is eternal. It's not created, it's eternal. It has no beginning, it has no end. Creatura is something that is created. It does have a beginning and an end. So think of the universe. The universe had a beginning, the Big Bang, and it will have an end. Because it's not created in the sense that Creator God was lonely one day and waved his magic wand and created the earth in 7 days. Not like that. But rather, there is a fundamental source to reality that is eternal. But it can generate the material world, or the illusion of the material world. So Creatura, or the material world, is not eternal, but comes from something that is eternal. It is contingent, dependent on the necessary and eternal realm of the Pleroma. In the Neogenian system, we call it the source. Very closely related to the frequency domain. So if anyone is familiar with the Neogenian system, the one would be more like the source, and the Pleroma would be more like the frequency domain. Very, very similar concepts, but not completely the same. One is an expression of the other. I don't want to get too lost in the weeds there. I could talk for hours about that, but let's move on. So, okay, so we have this created physical world, Creatura, that's not in the Pleroma, but comes from the Pleroma. It's generated by the Pleroma. He says the Pleroma is both beginning and end of created things. It pervadeth them as the light of the sun everywhere pervadeth the air. So let's jump to Abraxas, because I could keep going on and on about this. You know, he continues by saying we are parts of the Pleroma, but the Pleroma is also in us. The Pleroma is everywhere. So these are not independent things. The created world depends on the Pleroma, and the Pleroma isn't really separate from the created world, because that's where it comes from. It's generated by it. Anyway, just get the idea that there are these two related worlds of Pleroma and Creatura, or the infinite and eternal light and the material world, which is an expression of that light. In physics, we would see this as a condensation of light or light slowing. So let's get to Abraxas, because this video is about Abraxas. It's not about the Pleroma. If you guys want a video about the Pleroma, let me know. We could do that, certainly. So, okay. I'm just going to, there's some really good stuff here. I'm just going to skip over it because I'll be talking about it for hours. Let's get to Abraxas. Let me do, where is Abraxas here? Here we go. Okay. So he starts talking about God and the devil. And God and the devil are distinguished, he says, by the qualities fullness and emptiness, generation and destruction. Effectiveness is common to both. So Jung would basically describe zero as the devil and the infinite as God, kind of. But they're two separate things. And I'm being very loose with this, and I'm not saying that that's necessarily how I would describe it, but that's what Jung is basically saying here, that you have these opposites. Everything that comes out of the Pleroma is a pair of opposites. To God, therefore, always belongeth the devil. So everything that comes from the Pleroma gets generated as pairs of opposites. So the Pleroma generates God and the devil because they go together. You can't have them separate. They come together, God and the devil. So it's very important to understand in the way that Jung is explaining it, God is not the one or Pleroma. God is something, as the way Jung is explaining it, something that a force, an archetypal pattern that comes from the Pleroma, as does the devil. These two patterns of energy. Jung says there is a God above God that unites fullness and emptiness. A God above God that unites fullness and emptiness. This is a God whom ye know not, for mankind forgot it. We name it by its name, Abraxas. It is more indefinite still than God and devil. So this is where we get the first introduction of Abraxas. And what Abraxas is he says that this is the God that mankind forgot, basically meaning that humanity got so obsessed with putting things into boxes, good and bad, light and dark, God and Satan, that it forgot that there is something above that contains both within it. That's why humanity forgot it, because humanity is so obsessed with seeing things as this or that. It's very often what left brain thinking does. It categorizes things, and that can be very useful, but it doesn't necessarily reveal truth. Categorization, labeling is useful, but doesn't reveal truth with a capital T. It's useful and helpful in terms of, what we might label as a chair or a tree or a glass of water. Because we call this thing a glass and we categorize it as a glass and it lets us refer to it by a certain name. But is this really a glass? No, it's not. It's a complex of frequency patterns, a vibrational structure that isn't confined to just this area either. It's connected to everything around it as well. Like, it's not this isolated thing that we think of as a glass or even experience it like this. It's a complex of vibrational patterns, of frequency patterns that's ultimately connected with the entirety of the universe because everything is connected to each other. But guess what? That's a very unhelpful way for me if I need to say, hey, can you please hand me that glass over there? I'm not going to just be able to, I would just have to point and grunt. Ugh. Like, because this labeling is what allows us to communicate. But communication is different from truth. That's why Gustav Meyrink said, and I'm paraphrasing here because I don't remember the exact quote, but essentially that man has become caught in sleep in dreams in a web that it wove for itself. Or that's a very bad paraphrase, but something like this. Essentially, we got caught up in language. We mistook the label for reality, and we got trapped in this way of thinking. And we got trapped in this way of thinking, and we forgot the truth. That's why he's saying that mankind forgot Abraxas. They got so obsessed with God and the devil that they forgot about Abraxas. Now, it's more indefinite still than God and the devil. Abraxas is indefinite, more indefinite than God and the devil. Why? Well, God is defined as creation, light, etc., etc. The devil is defined as destruction, entropy, darkness, etc., etc. Abraxas is indefinite because it contains both. That's what that means. That God may be distinguished from it, Abraxas, we name God Helios, or sun. Okay, so this is kind of important here. What Jung is basically saying, like, using the word God can be really confusing. You can see even in the title, my title was The Hidden God Above God and the Devil. That's kind of confusing because you're using the label God for two different things that mean different things. So he's basically saying, let's replace or label what people typically think of as God as the sun, so that we can not get confused about what we're talking about. So people don't think if we say God, we might mean, oh, are we talking about the one, the source, Jehovah, Yahweh? What are we talking about here? Because that label has been so corrupt and used for everything that you have to ask someone what they mean when they say that. And that's why in a Gnostic text, the Gospel of Philip, it says essentially something like, those that think of the word God and Christ and church are not thinking of the right thing. They're thinking of the wrong things, essentially. I'm paraphrasing again. But basically that these words don't mean what you think that they mean. So Jung is saying, hey, instead of God and the devil, let's say the sun and the devil. And then we can talk about Abraxas. So he says, Abraxas standeth above the sun and above the devil. Meaning, remember, we're calling God the sun. And sun, I don't mean child, I mean sun like light. So Abraxas standeth above the sun and above the devil, meaning above God and the devil, or above light and darkness, essentially, depending on how you want to interpret this symbolism. Now, Jung says, had the Pleroma a being, Abraxas would be its manifestation. But it is also Creatura because it is distinct from the Pleroma. Okay, so remember we talked about the Pleroma as this fullness, and then Creatura as the physical world that's generated by it. So Abraxas is essentially, Jung is essentially saying, if the Pleroma were a being, it would be Abraxas. But, he says, Abraxas is not just the Pleroma, Abraxas is also Creatura, or the created world, or the physical world. It's both. It's the whole thing. And that is key here to understanding what this is really about. So here's something I want to talk about. So Jung starts describing Abraxas as being this concept that has the qualities of God and the devil and goes beyond them. I don't remember. I think I mentioned this in the live stream. This is a live stream, but this is a recorded part of it. Okay, think of it like this. Think of God or the sun as the positive pole of a battery and the devil as the negative pole of the battery. Both are required to generate energy, but Abraxas is the whole battery. So you can't say Abraxas is just positive or Abraxas is just negative because it's both. So that's a good way to conceptualize it. If God is positive pole, the devil is negative pole, Abraxas is the whole battery that's required for life to exist. We require those energies. Those energies are what fuel life. We wouldn't be able to have life without this system of circuitry running, the system of power. So because Abraxas is both, he says Abraxas is twofold, but you don't see it because your eyes are the warring opposites. And in this, its power are extinguished. So basically, you can't see Abraxas because your eyes, or the way you interpret things, is used to seeing things as either or, not both. So you can't see Abraxas because you're always looking at one or the other. So Jung then goes into describing, okay, I'm going to try and go faster here because there's some points I want to get to and I'm taking so long. Carl Jung then describes Abraxas in terms of opposing forces. So he says, when the God-Son speaketh is, or what the God-Son speaketh is life, what the devil speaketh is death, but Abraxas speaketh that hallowed and accursed word, which is life and death at the same time. So he's saying if God is life and the devil is death, Abraxas is life and death. Because they need each other. Think about it. If we want to grow and transform and give birth to new things, old things have to die. Old belief patterns, old identities must die for new life to occur. And it's the same thing even with, physical matter. Physical matter, when a body dies and decomposes, it gives life to plants, growth. So Abraxas is the whole circuitry that allows existence to be possible. If existence were just one or the other, it wouldn't exist. There would be nothing happening. So think of it like yin and yang. Think of God and the devil as the yin and the yang. And Abraxas is the whole circle. So then Jung begins to describe Abraxas in these terms of opposites, which is really cool and poetic. But real quick, I'm just going to read some of them to you because there's a point that I want you to see that's really cool. So he says, Abraxas begetteth truth and lying, good and evil, light and darkness, in the same word, in the same act. So it all comes from Abraxas. It is the abundance that seeketh union with the emptiness. It is love and love's murder. It is the saint and his betrayer. It is the brightest light of day and the darkest night of madness. It's the son's horror of the mother. It's the mother's love for the son. It is the delight of the earth and the cruelty of the heavens. So he describes it in terms of all these opposites in a very poetic way. Okay, so let's unpack something really cool that I haven't really seen anyone talk about this. Someone must have, I would think. I haven't seen it, but I think it's very, very interesting. So you have this idea of Abraxas containing all these opposites. It's love and love's murder. It's the saint and the betrayer, the brightest of light and the darkest of night, etc., etc. So remember that Carl Jung wrote this in 1916. And he was looking, he used Basilides and Abraxas to get across this idea that he wanted to explain or have people understand symbolically. And he chose the symbol of Abraxas to do it. Why? Probably because Abraxas is described as both ruling the heavens and the created world. So Jung probably saw that duality and ran with it. But here's the thing. In the ancient Gnostic texts, Abraxas isn't really described like how Jung is describing it. It's not like there's an ancient Gnostic text that says, oh, Abraxas is the saint and the sinner, the war and the peace, the this and that. There's no Gnostic text that really says that. Basically, the closest thing is the Basilidian teaching that Abraxas rules the heaven and the earth. That's pretty much it. In terms of Gnostic texts. Later, we get symbolism in terms of, but let's not go too deep in the weeds. There, or I'll be here all day. I need to learn to not go on so many tangents. So, but long story short, you can see that Gnostic, Jung kind of took this idea of, oh, there's this being that rules the heavens and the earth. I'm going to take that and flesh it out into this being that represents the union of opposites. It is abundance and emptiness, love and love's murder, the saint and the betrayer, the brightest of light and the darkest of night. Okay, so keep that in mind. Here's the interesting thing. So Jung wrote this in 1916. The vast majority of Gnostic texts were not discovered until 1945, well after Jung wrote this. And when we look at the Gnostic texts that were discovered, there is another entity that fits much better than Abraxas in Gnostic terms in being this explicit union of opposites. And I wonder very much if Jung had access to these texts at the time of writing this, if he possibly would have chosen this other entity rather than Abraxas to represent this union of opposites. So let me talk to you about this text. It's very cool. It's called The Thunder Perfect Mind. It's one of my favorite Gnostic texts, and guess what? It's one of the most mysterious. Because it doesn't really fit a lot of the Gnostic traditions that we're familiar with. And it's in the form of in the first person frame, some entity just talking. Right? So the very first line is, I was sent forth from the power, and I have come to those who reflect upon me. Okay? So it's this thing that's talking. We don't know who is talking here. Now, people have speculated that it is Sophia. However, to me, it seems much more like Barbelo. Barbelo, in Gnostic terms, is the very first emanation of the One. And Barbelo is described as the Trinity. The Father, the Mother, and the Son. Not only that, but Barbelo, in a book called The Trimorphic Protonoia, aka three forms of first thought, proto, first, noia, thought, trimorphic, three forms of first thought. This is Barbelo because she is the first thought that takes three forms, the Father, the Mother, and the Son. And in it, Barbelo is described as existing in everything and everyone because she is essentially the foundation of reality. She exists in you and me and everyone and everything in the realm of the light and the realm of Creatura, the created thing. So you're starting to see the connection here. In all things, whether it's the realm of light or the realm of matter, Barbelo is in all things. Barbelo is in you. It's in everything. It's in everyone. Barbelo even says, I wore Jesus. So Barbelo expressed itself as Jesus. Barbelo even says that she is within the archons, the forces of darkness. So she's in Jesus and the archons. She's in the light and the dark. She's in everything. So are you starting to see that very interesting connection between how Jung describes Abraxas? So let's take a look at Thunder Perfect Mind. Now remember, we don't know for sure who's speaking here. People have speculated that it is Sophia, but I feel like it fits Barbelo much more. And let me read to you some of this. And I want you to remember and see how, so remember, Carl Jung described Abraxas as truth and lying, good and evil, light and darkness, life and death, emptiness and union, love and love's murder, the saint and the betrayer, the brightest light, the darkest of night, etc. Right? Okay, so let's read Thunder Perfect Mind. Thunder Perfect Mind says, I have come to those who reflect upon me. So for those who are ready to see me, to have the capacity, I have come for them. And says, do not be ignorant of me anywhere or anytime. Do not be ignorant of me. Again, this is very similar to Jung saying Abraxas is the god that humanity forgot. And let me just make a note to myself here. I want to...
Player lol.
Oh, why is
a video about prayer?
Whoa.
How to escape the Antichrist. Dumbo analogy for higher self-anchor.
What the heck?
Deeper dive into the Antichrist and concept of our great power.
My computer, my Word document is like just writing by itself. That's super weird and creepy. Let's hope it doesn't keep doing that. Okay, I just want to make a note to myself. Sometimes I get flashes of inspiration that I don't want to forget for possible videos or projects. All right, so where were we? We were talking about, yes, so how Barbelo says, don't be ignorant of me. I have come for those who are ready. Very similar to Jung saying, this is the God that mankind forgot and can't see. But get this. This is what she says, which is super cool. For I am the first and the last. I am the honored one and the scorned one. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the mother and the daughter. I am the barren one, and many are her sons. I am the bride and the bridegroom. I am the mother of my father and the sister of my husband, and he is my offspring. I am the slave. I am the ruler. I am the silence, and I am the voice. And it goes on. I am knowledge and ignorance. I am shame and boldness. I am strength and I am fear. I am war and peace. And this is, there's so much, like it keeps going. I don't have enough time to read it all, but it goes and goes and goes. I am the one whom they call life, and you have called death. So you can see that this is almost, if you would have copy and pasted some of this into Jung's book, it would feel like it fit perfectly. So basically what I mean is that in terms of Gnosticism, the way that Barbelo, or whoever this is, in Thunder Perfect Mind, fits Abraxas way more than the actual Gnostic conception of Abraxas. The Gnostic conception of Abraxas was just, oh, this God that rules the heavens and the earth. And so Jung was like, okay, cool. I'm going to make this into a whole thing about opposites combined. But Thunder Perfect Mind, which Jung didn't have access to, is almost word for word what Jung wrote. So Jung was really tapping into this same archetypal pattern. He was just looking for, well, okay, what symbol can I use to represent it? Oh, I'll use Abraxas. But this is, it comes so close that it's almost scary to Jung's 7 Sermons of the Dead. And I just think it's so cool. And I really wonder if Jung had access to this material, if he, instead of choosing Abraxas, he would have chosen Barbelo, or at least whoever this is supposed to be. I feel very strongly that it sounds like Barbelo. And it's really incredible. And I think it's super cool. Tell me what you think in the comments. I just find this absolutely fascinating and mind-blowing that it's almost word for word what Jung wrote before he even knew that this book existed. Almost 30 years before it was even discovered. And this is a very long text, Thunder Perfect Mind, but it's really beautiful. If you guys want a whole video about Thunder Perfect Mind and Barbelo, let me know. Tell me in the comments, because I would be happy to do a video about that. And yeah, I just find this so incredibly fascinating, how close this symbolism is. So Barbelo fits what Jung is describing as Abraxas. But the whole point to remember here about this is it doesn't really matter what symbol you use. You could use Abraxas. You could use Barbelo. It doesn't matter. You could pick another symbol. It's whatever resonates with you. Because remember, the symbol is not the archetype. The symbol is what stands for the archetype. So there is this archetypal pattern that exists that is about the union of opposites. And we can use the symbol of Abraxas or Barbelo or anything else to represent it. Think about the icon on an app. Is the icon the app? No, but it indicates the app so that you can select it. You could change the icon of the app, I think. Can you? I don't know. I don't know if you can. You theoretically could, right? You could imagine that you could choose any picture, any image to represent that app. You could change the icon to anything you like, but it would still open the same app. So the icon is what allows you to access the app. That's what these symbols are. These symbols are icons that allow you to symbolically access these archetypal patterns. Because your unconscious mind doesn't communicate in language or words as we understand it, but symbols and myths and legends. That's why this stuff is so important. Because you need those symbols to be your app icon so that you're even aware that there is an app. Because guess what? If your phone didn't have any app icons, how the heck would you find the apps? You just have to tap on blank spaces and hope you get the right one. So these symbols allow your mind to focus on a certain pattern that you're trying to access. That's what all these things are. Whether you talk about the Gnostic eons that represent patterns of things like understanding, love, ideas, conceptualization, memory, knowledge, understanding, or archons that represents things like war, lust, desire, envy, jealousy, greed, etc. These symbols that we use are like assigning icons to different apps so that we can know how to access them. Otherwise, we might be wanting to tap on the understanding app, but accidentally tap on the lies app because we don't have the icons differentiating them. So that's what this is. That's why I talk about this stuff. This stuff doesn't describe history. This stuff describes symbols that you can use as a language to communicate with your unconscious mind. That is the key thing to understand here. So Abraxas is an incredibly powerful archetypal pattern that goes beyond the archetypal patterns of God or devil. It's the pattern that generates those patterns, that contains those patterns. It's the pattern of patterns is what it is. So, and in terms of personal psychology, Abraxas represents your higher self becoming the integration of your psyche, the integration of the totality of your psyche, and the integration of all the opposite forces within you. The eons and the archons, the angels and the demons, integrating them together into a single, unified, whole, integrated system where they're no longer at war with each other, but acting in unison and harmony. Anyway, tell me what you thought about the Abraxas Barbelo similarity. I think that's super cool. Tell me what you thought about that. And as always, if you made it to the end of this video, tell me in the comments. I'm always really curious about who makes it to the end of some of these longer videos. So tell me in the comments if you did. And I also want to remind you, hey, this is more than a channel. We are a revolution of the mind here to make higher consciousness go viral. We are setting the world on fire with this knowledge. So make sure you hit share, subscribe, and like, so that we can spread that fire even further. As always, if you want to help out even more, become a member, get access to a lot of free downloads and members only videos. We're having a members only video pretty much right now, right after this, a live stream recording of it that you can be a part of called What If Cain Was Right? The First Murder Was a Lie, as we take a look at the Gnostic interpretation of the story of Cain and Abel. And it's nothing like you've heard before. It's crazy. It's really interesting. And you can also check out my books if you're interested in the Neogenian system. And if you're looking for a free way to support, follow me over on Spotify. Helps out a lot. Links to all those things are in the description of this video. And I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports. Once again, I am so sorry. I still haven't updated this list. I have been crazy busy working on projects. I'm working on something really exciting right now that you guys are going to love. But I will update this soon. So, shout out to Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, Dallas, Nusalina, Eric, Soul, Vivian, Tornado, Banshee, Pop Out, Hyper Saiyan, Chris, and everyone else. Thank you very much. My name is Morgue. I am Neogenian. Ad Astra.